We will have that available on the PowerVay website. We are really glad to welcome our great speakers today for this webinar, Advocacy Amid Uncertainty, and it's sponsored by ASAE's Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Council, GRAPAC. And I'll introduce each of the speakers, and then I will hand the floor over to Danielle, our moderator. Ooh, so one moment. Danielle Duran Barron, MA, MBA, CAE, is our moderator, and she's the founder of Insightful Concepts, a strategic consultancy working with organizations to advance their missions, motivate their teams, and engage their stakeholders through storytelling, open communication, empathy, and inclusion. She has more than 2 decades experience in marketing communications. She also has a master's in journalism and an MBA in marketing, and is fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. And she's the vice chair of ASAE's GRAPAC and a DELP scholar. Quadrico Driscoll is the manager of legislative and political affairs for the American Urological Association, the premier medical association for the advancement of urologic patient care. Before working at AUA, he worked for 2 years in patient voluntary health associations, where he advocated for the patient voice to Congress and different agencies. In a typical workday, he's engaged with members of Congress, their staff, and stakeholders to develop and progress laws that affect healthcare. He's an adjunct professor of legislative politics at the George Washington University School of Political Management. And he also is a writer that contributes to The Hill and the New York Times, Voice of America, and other types of news organizations. David Lusk is the founder of Key Advocacy, and he specializes in developing nationwide grassroots and grasstops training programs for associations, nonprofits, and corporations. Since 2010, he's provided customized training for more than 7,500 association members, nonprofit volunteers, and C-suite executives. He's received nationwide recognition for his efforts, including developing the Key Contacts program for the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM. He graduated from Brown University with degrees in public policy and business economics. And Sherry Stanley Whitworth is an industry pioneer in the field of online advocacy. She worked with a small team to build the first grassroots advocacy system the online grassroots advocacy system in 1996. And she's been extremely involved in best practices throughout her career, helping to teach people how to get it right and organizations that haven't. And she spent a lot of time helping organizations make the most of what they have. In her role at FiscalNote, she acts as the organization's managing director, focusing much of her time and attention on industry relations and coaching team members. She's also on the board of the Public Affairs Council and is a member of GRAPAC and actually the incoming chair as well. So I'm so glad for our panelists for joining us, and this is going to be a great session. I will hand the floor over to Danielle.
Thank you so much, Mary Kate. It's great to be here. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon on behalf of myself and my fellow speakers. Just wanted to let you know, this is going to be, we intend this to be more as a conversation. David Lusk is going to be helping out, piloting the slides. I'll be just coming up with questions, and we want you to ask your questions throughout the session. So feel free to use the chat or the Q&A buttons, and as we see them come in, we'll try to address them. We want this to be very interactive. And if you have any insights, any best practices, any great ideas that you'd like to share with the group, would love that too, because we're here and we're here to learn together. So without further ado, let's get started. Your team, Mary Kate already done a fantastic introduction, so we'll be learning together. So now here we are, 3 months into this pandemic, something that's never happened before, which begs pretty much 2 questions among many others. What can we do, and when and should we do it. What do you do as we're exiting COVID? We're seeing, some movement in the legislation. We're seeing, people getting out and anxious to get started. What is appropriate to do? You want to make sure that you're doing the right things and you're keeping the right pace. So, what do you do? So this is going to be the bulk of our conversation this afternoon. And we're going to start with the next slide. So here we are. You still have 3.5 months to do something, right? What should this be? Everybody's anxious. So where do you start? What should be prioritized? Quadricus, what are your tips on this one? Let's start with you.
So what should be prioritized? First thing, you have to really assess your legislative priorities. As we all know that we are in the midst of civil unrest aimed at protest and as well as COVID-19. I would recommend tying your legislative priorities to making it relevant to this moment in time. And I would also even tie this into PAC solicitations and contributions as well. I mean, I know, of course, that there is massive unemployment. I know that the Hill asks right now tend to be related to COVID-19 or even police reform. But the overwhelming and compelling reason, I think, to start soliciting and even to start reaching out to members of Congress is first assessing your legislative priorities and advocacy goals. And again, in some ways, tying them into either police reform or to COVID-19. Currently, what we're seeing, of course, is that even the Black Lives Matter movement has gone corporate, and COVID-19 has exposed the pandemic of the racial disparities with regard to health and other disparities within our society. And so tying your current ask and making your congressional ask and priorities relevant to the moment. I would also mention seeing if that there is a way to make your current ask adjacent to everything that's going on in this moment as well. First, so those are the two steps. And then I would also ensure that you all seek consultation from your legislative affairs council, your political affairs council, or the members who help to make decisions with regard to your legislative priorities.
Yeah. Thank you, Quadricus. And you mentioned very wisely assessing, right? That's what you should do first.
Absolutely.
Sherry, so I'll pass it on to you. How do you do that? How do you assess where things stand right now?
Well, I think it's really important, and thanks for everybody for being here. I think it's really important to be kind of a little comfortable with everyone's plan went out the door. We all started the year, everyone goes through that goal setting, and then by the first or second week in March, we were all just shuddering at home. A lot of organizations, a lot of associations and members of those associations didn't have a plan to even work from home. They didn't have the materials and that sort of thing. So it was a huge disruption. It still is for many. And what I think people can, take comfort in is we're all in the same boat to some extent. And what we can do at this point is yeah, let's assess where we are. You've had these goals at the beginning of the year. A lot of those political priorities and those issue priorities went dormant. Some states that were not in session are now in session. Some have gone out of session and aren't meeting. So I guess the best thing that I would advise people to do is just be comfortable with things were disrupted. Now let's see, based on what state you work in, or if you're a national organization and you're working on federal policy, what are the likelihoods and the things that now things are start going again, that we know we can still get back on track. We know that Congress is working on infrastructure. We know they're working on police reform and some things to that nature. So look at what the schedule looks like, and then does that lay or align with your priorities as an organization? And let's reset the goals for the rest of the year. What can we accomplish? We do have a very tight timeline because of the elections. So, I think it's okay, but I would be communicating that out to your folks where you are, the disruption. Everybody's going to know that your plan was disrupted, and what the likelihood, or what is still on track, or what can we put back on track to get going and get some traction or get some success in short time.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And speaking of, the tight deadline, David, this is the final pre-election advocacy push. We don't have a whole lot of time left. What should associations do? Email, everybody's talking about email, but that's clearly not enough, is it?
Sorry, I needed to unmute there. No, and first of all, to what both Quadricos and what Sherry said, you need to look at what issues that you have possibly that you can work on, one or two, and what might be most related to what's going on in the greater world. Those are the items that are definitely going to get the most attention. In this sort of final push that we have, trying to achieve your entire agenda is probably not likely at this time. So what can we do from now until October, when lawmakers, at least on the federal level and many on the state level as well, are deciding to go and campaign, or are going to need to go campaign? Definitely collect stories. What is going on with your audience, especially in regards to the pandemic or what they might be experiencing with Black Lives Matter? Figure out what you have, what type of assets that you have, because some of this, when we do see certain non-COVID or non-BLM items move, they're probably going to move with lightning speed. So you want to have your assets ready now. You're going to need to go virtual beyond just email. There are organizations who are still conducting meetings. They're conducting site visits. They're doing informal coffees with Congress. In a session that I did recently, we actually had a staffer from a district office in Pennsylvania who came in and said, "Oh, we are still engaging with constituents. And in fact, we're engaging with constituents like we've never had to or been able to before." They're not in Washington, D.C., trying to get to events in a rush hour traffic situation. They're not back in their district driving from one side of the district to the other. They're hopping onto and off of Zoom, name the platform type of interactive calls, maybe even every 20 minutes. So they're knocking out 3 serious meetings within an hour. Can you prepare your advocates together ahead of time? Can you submit questions ahead of time? Follow ASAE's lead with these virtual advocacy weeks. I've got multiple clients that are working on that right now, so that it's not just the one-time event that's going to get attention. And perhaps the most important thing, no matter what you do, make certain that your advocates are prepared to engage in that manner. We've had some campaigns where they didn't download the software ahead of time. They were a little bit late to a meeting, didn't think it was that big a deal. And those types of things, you've got to be very careful with what you're doing from now through the end of the year.
Perfect. So I have a question that's been, percolating, and that goes to you, Quadricos. Everybody's wondering, when do PACs get to be PACs again? Everything's been on hold. How do you get started without sounding completely out of tune?
Right, that's an excellent question. There are a couple suggestions I have. First, you want to meet with your PAC board to get buy-in from your leadership and to, again, assess and determine the appropriate next steps from there. Secondly, your PAC should be really hearing from you at this time. Members should be hearing from their PACs right now, even if it's simply just letting them know that you are showing care and concern about what they're going through in this moment, whether that's in a bi-weekly or monthly newsletter from the PAC chair or even the PAC board. Just again, letting them know that PAC is still here and that we care, even though we're not necessarily soliciting. Thirdly, as businesses are beginning to open back up, I think the summer is a ripe time to consider solicitations. But before solicitation, I think also now is a very keen time to determine and to establish what the new giving process looks like, right? Again, assessing your legislative advocacy priorities, the districts, the races, creating a score system. As I also mentioned in my ASAEC article on 3 ways to engage young professionals in the association advocacy efforts, this might also be a great time to consider adding a younger member or a member of any racial or ethnic minority to your PAC board or your advocacy efforts as well. Fourth, I think this is a great time for PACs, like any institution, to reimagine what the new normal looks like. What we do know, of course, is that fundraisers, virtual fundraisers, are still taking place, although not at the extent to which they were pre-COVID. And so one lesson I think that we've all taken from this, those of us, the associations that have PACs, is that getting a member of Congress on the phone or on a video conference probably will continue post-COVID. And I think that's a strategy that we all sort of can incorporate. And I would also lastly say, be creative about the virtual fundraisers that you do decide to do. So often we get on the Zoom or go to meetings and I think that we're all sort of tired and zoomed out, so to speak. So be creative about it. I have been on a Zoom fundraiser where it was encouraged that members wear their favorite hat or invite their pets or their coworkers, i.e. their children, to join the fundraisers. So make it creative and make it fun and exciting, since we're all sort of all Zoom now. And again, as I said, I think the best way to demonstrate value during this time is to highlight the fact that even with civil unrest via the protests and COVID-19, this is still an election year. And at some point, members, candidates are going to call and they're not going to stop calling. And so you need a strategy really during this time.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I love the idea of inviting your coworkers. I have very eager coworkers here. So Sherry, elections now are 5 weeks away. And you've done pretty much all you can advocacy-wise. You've done, you've taken all the tips from David and Frederica's, and now where can you go? Is there anything that you can still do? Everybody's zoomed out, everybody's done, and what next?
Well, I think election activities are the lesser tactic that advocacy organizations tend to participate in. However, I always tell people that they're probably the one thing that everyone can improve upon. And they're the one thing that if you get the right people elected, your future advocacy is going to be so much easier to deal with. So I think it's really important of stressing that to your advocacy base, to your member base. There's lots of easy things that you can do. When you're thinking about, you might not have issues right now, you can be getting people registered to vote. Right now with our climate, you've got an energy. People that maybe aren't registered or haven't voted in a while and have been a little lethargic are really, energized. Let's take advantage of that momentum, get people registered, get people to sign up for early and absentee ballots. That's something that almost all of us, I don't know if any of you on the panel have done it. I've never voted early before. So familiarizing myself with that process is important. I'm going to have in my household a first-time voter. My son will be turning 18 on August 14th. So I'm so excited that he's going to be able to be participating. We've had him watching the candidate debates along the way, but share that kind of activities with other people in your organization. We really need to turn out a big vote. I think too, putting things in place in front of people like scorecards. Even if you don't want to give them a score, you can show people how electeds that are in office today have voted on your issues in the past. And so without endorsing a candidate, which I know most associations won't do, you can certainly put out educational materials. The other thing that I've seen organizations do that I think is really important, we feel kind of far away from candidates. So getting those candidates invited to address your membership, that can tie into what Quadriceos was talking about around PAC too. Invite maybe the PAC contributors or the certain level contributors to a private teletown hall or some meeting like this where they can actually queue up questions for the elected officials or the candidates. so that they can be addressing the issues that your people care about. I think it's about like making people feel closer to the process and really a part of the solution. And I think those are a couple of simple ways that you can do that.
Sure.
Yeah,
We had a question that
yeah.
came in. Someone's asking about some tips on conducting a virtual site visit and what a virtual site visit might look like. Quadricos, has your organization worked on that? Do you have anything coming up on the horizon that you're trying to manage in that regard?
So currently, we're not conducting virtual site visits, but that is certainly up for consideration. We are actually in the process of planning our virtual fly-in, virtual summit that's coming up at the end of August. But to that question, I think it's a very good idea to set up a virtual site visit or even just a virtual video conference with your local, be it state as well as national.
Yeah, David, do you have any of your tips?
Yeah, I want to chime in on that. First of all, if you're prepared for your virtual site visit by maybe producing video ahead of time, you can certainly show perhaps what your organization has done to create a safe workplace. But if let's say that you're representing a lot of companies, maybe perhaps in the mining industry, there's nothing wrong with putting together a video of short clips of maybe the amount of showing the work site in your location and perhaps some of the other organizations, the local smaller companies that are benefiting by being involved in that industry. What is the economic footprint? This is an opportunity to not just show a graph of what's happening in the community, but to actually bring that lawmaker to various aspects of the community. One of the things that I'm hearing from lawmakers and their staff more than anything, and Quadricos had kind of said, individuals are going to be they're going to turn into candidates again. The more that we can bring constituents to those elected officials, the more favor we're going to curry. And that's by preparing ahead of time, having a series of advocates already lined up who are going to show up, preparing the questions ahead of time, submitting that to a lawmaker so they're prepared with how they want to answer when possible. Those are the type of things that can be very beneficial, but also diversifying what you're asking individuals to do. Looking at ways to engage with lawmakers through social media and having a certain number of folks who engage in that way. Someone could actually handle the site visit tour. They're also looking at scheduling the face-to-face meeting with that lawmaker. Pay attention to lawmakers who have telephone town halls or other virtual town halls that they're setting up, and get your advocates on that as well. Just a number of different ways that you can be valuable.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing a lot of good conversations going on here on the chat. People are suggesting watch parties, gearing up to election, run for office, conduct virtual days with their elected officials. We have a question here it's a really good one too. How do you handle the delicate balance of trying to get advocates involved on behalf of your association right now, while also acknowledging how thin your members and advocates are spread? Everybody's tired, zoomed out, furloughed, laid off, short of money. You want to acknowledge that, but you still want them to write to Congress. You still want them to share their stories and take an active role. How do you thread this very thin line?
I could take a first stab at that question. I think the first thing, and this is the right time to do it, is really to educate your members about all of your members, I should say, comprehensively about your advocacy priorities, your advocacy strategies, and actually rethink and retool your advocacy efforts during this time. One of the things that we are doing, as I mentioned, the AUA is planning, and is in the midst of replanning our virtual summit. And we've already made the decision to open the summit, to open our fly-in to all of AUA rather than the originally 250 urologists who just, registered to attend back in March. Once you begin to open it up to a larger membership, you begin to expose a lot of members about your legislative priorities, about your advocacy efforts. So this is a good time, I think, to educate. We all know within the realm of legislative politics or advocacy, there's usually what's the 2010 rule of 20% or 10% of people who are actually doing the work. So this is a great time to expand that and to really educate the membership about the advocacy efforts. and also peer-to-peer. Just like peer-to-peer helps within PAC solicitations and fundraising, I think peer-to-peer in terms of educating about advocacy and legislative priorities also helps. So having a peer or senior member talk to another peer or junior member about the advocacy efforts that your association doing also helps.
Yeah, fantastic. So now we're way in the fall, October, November, December. This is kind of like, you know, less Bush and election related post-election initiatives. And now we're trying to get ready for the next year. So what do we do? I'm gonna go do a round robin here. Sherry, you wanna start with some
Sure.
words of wisdom?
Sure. I looked at some of the people. I think a lot of the people on the call today are from state organizations, state associations. I think, to me, intel that's out there looking at pre-filed bills ahead of time gives you a great understanding of what the state legislatures are going to take up for the new year. I think that is, you know, very telling. It can help you identify how to like latch on to, you know, kind of reposition your bill or your issue to fit in with that kind of the pre-file. I think too, we list on here getting your folks to understand the value. I think there's going to be, you know, a big outpouring of election participation. So new people are going to be coming in. As an organization, you need to understand, where do I have advocates or members that have a relationship with one of these newly elected members of the legislature or of Congress for that matter. So it's hard to pull out of people, but most every time I talk about this in organizations, people are amazed that they had someone in their organization that had a very close tie to an elected official. I would say elected official and staff, because we know the staffers are doing a lot of the work and writing a lot of the legislation. So finding out who those people are in your organization that have those relationships and putting those in a system and working towards benchmarking where you are and trying to strengthen where you need additional foot soldiers.
Perfect. Quadricos, do you have any advice to share?
I think that I would say, particularly on the solicitation with regard to the PAC, I would venture to say start with your VIP membership, start again with your PAC board, start with your leadership. Peer-to-peer email campaigns are helpful. I would also even say probably don't solicit to you donors. Start with those who are already in your established legislative pipeline, who have showed up to your fly-in, whether that is virtual or if you had one in person. Expand and open up your fly-in to all members, and to ensure that there's really the peer-to-peer touch, I think is really going to carry the day.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, David?
Actually, if we could just take a half step or two back, please. I know that we have a few attendees that are only on by phone and they may not be able to see what's going on in the chat. And I just wanted to point out a few comments that we're receiving. So someone up in Oregon, as far as, and I think this actually addresses Emily's question about how do you keep advocates engaged. And I think connecting them to lawmakers, perhaps, like we haven't seen them before, if they haven't had an opportunity to. So someone in Oregon is actually connecting the mayor of Portland, where some members and PAC trustees can actually attend. This, obviously, this lawmaker is up for re-election in November. So creating something that maybe only certain participants of a certain type of nature. Are they your PAC donors or trustees? Are they your more advanced key contacts that you've been working with, and can you provide them with access that the general membership isn't perhaps getting? We're also seeing where Rachel, and I believe it's Tristano, they're actually going to conduct a virtual Realtor Day on Beacon Hill, where they're speaking with local legislators this Friday, those who are from that region, and using the state association talking points and issues. So again, still trying to connect as they would normally, just leveraging technology to do so. And then we have another comment where someone's talking about we're probably not going to have presidential debates this year, or they will maybe be in a very unusual situation. They're looking to respond with some enhanced voter registration watch parties. I think these are some of the points that Sherry talked about, and getting out the vote, that maybe leading up to this, bringing everyone together and providing them guidance, and if they're going to submit their voter registration online or fill out that form and mail that in. We've even got one other person, Greg Knopp, who actually serves on the ASAE APAC committee, talks about encouraging members to actually run for office themselves on any level, and then to support that effort with some type of a campaign school or producing maybe programming that will make your members stronger candidates. So at least I just wanted to address some of those items there.
Now there's one more that just came through from Jeff Stone.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and sort of read his comment.
All right, so we've never had so many congressional members meetings via Zoom before, of course. It's very effective to have members hear firsthand from nursery and greenhouse operators and the impact of the pandemic has had on their businesses. Happy to share he's in Oregon. And I think he raised a really good point, because a lot of these people, they just don't have the time or the means, if they're business owners or, depending on where they are in their careers, to leave whatever they are, Oregon or, even New York City, to take off a day or two to come to DC and have the face-to-face time with, legislators. Zoom, it has, in a sense, democratized that. So you can see, the people who are out there doing the work and giving them a voice and a platform that they didn't have before. I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's very powerful.
And there can be a silver lining, not that there's anything about a pandemic that is really positive, but by leveraging this technology, you mentioned maybe people who are working in the nursery and they don't have an opportunity to get away from their business. I mean, what about those who are in far reaches of a state, even trying to get to a state capital visit day? Now you can bring them to their lawmaker. There are other folks who we've seen a number of organizations, especially in the nonprofit world, who have been leveraging technology because they may have members for some reason or another who aren't able to easily attend a Capitol visit day. If they're perhaps wheelchair bound, or maybe they're actually in a hospital somewhere, these are opportunities to leverage technology to show lawmakers just sort of the environment for a constituent like they've never seen before. And of course, the other item that you brought up, Danielle, is that there might be some people who just don't have the financial means to either get to a large state capital, to come into DC, the transportation costs, the time away from work. We're connecting people in a much more efficient fashion. And I think, regardless of what happens in 2021 and when Congress and the state legislatures open up to the public, I think we're going to see some organizations retain, just like what we saw back in 2001 with anthrax. Anthrax suddenly made the viability of e-advocacy happen, and it kept it in its permanence. We saw back then, I worked with Sherry at the time at the company that they referenced, not every member of Congress even had an online web form to complete. Once that happened and the Hill was shut down and communications that had been mailed in were being burned and everything in the offices were burned, suddenly we saw members of Congress embrace that technology, and it happened in the states. I wouldn't be surprised to see a much more consistent leaning on technology by federal and state lawmakers, and even local, moving forward.
Yeah, and David, we have another comment here from Cook Witter. Advocacy versus electioneering/campaigning is an important difference for 501c3s. I hope that the listeners recognize the difference. And we hear a lot about 501c3s not being able to lobby. And if, Rodriguez, why don't you take that and kind of explain it a little bit in case some of the listeners or people who are watching don't know that distinction so well.
Right. So there's a difference between a 501c3 and a 501c6 organizations, and so you need to check with your, I would say, your leadership or even your general counsel, if you're fortunate to have one, about what type of organization you have and where you're able to lobby or even, dare I say, contribute or even start a PAC. It is also important to note that I think part of the COVID conversations legislatively that we've been having with members of Congress is to ensure that the COVID relief funds are included with 501c3 organizations. Largely, they were not, they were excluded from those packages. And so, there has been a number of robust conversations about making sure that 501c6 and 501c3 organizations were included in those COVID relief efforts. But again, it's ensuring and knowing what type of organization you have, which would then, of course, lend its efforts to lobbying directly, as well as even PAC contributions.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. David, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, and that's definitely something to be cognizant and careful of is, electioneering and campaigning versus advocacy. You can always educate and inform. One of the things that Sherry often talks about is the importance in her technology. There's an ability to show what that lawmaker has done historically on behalf of your organization's issues. Have they consistently been a co-sponsor, even if that bill didn't come to a vote? Have they voted with or against your stance on an issue? When it comes down to factual, this is what they did. Not that we love the fact that they did this, but this is what they did. They voted up or down on issue one. They are the current elected official. We need to take our issues to them if we're going to get anything. We're not necessarily endorsing them, but we are connecting constituents to that lawmaker so that there can be the conversation that needs to happen. And but that is a very important distinction to be cautious of. And we have heard of nonprofits that actually lost their nonprofit status by crossing that line and not being as careful. It's much easier to set up a virtual town hall than it is to set up a virtual candidate situation, because what if one of the major candidates can't attend? This is the only time that worked for your organization. Now you had one and not the other. Now it looks like you're playing favorites. So those can be a big challenge to execute.
And Danielle, if I might add to David's point, I think embedded in that question, the presupposition is that there's a difference between lobbying and advocacy, right? And we need to ensure that lobbying is a part of advocacy, but advocacy, generally speaking, is educating your member of Congress or your state lawmaker or even your local elected official. Lobbying is more of the direct solicitation ask per se. We all do education. And so educating your lawmakers is not against the law, whether you are a 501c3 or a 501c6.
Yeah, thanks, Portugal. And that's exactly where I was going. Most of my career has been spent on 501c3s. And whenever we went to the Hill, we were very deliberate when we said we're here to educate. We're not asking you to take a position on any pending legislation. However, this is, an issue. We want to be a resource. When you talk about, in my case was accreditation specifically, we want you to know that we're here. We have subject matter experts. So just opening that door and starting that conversation. And in the beginning, leadership was very leery and a bit afraid, but then as we kind of became more of our MO, and they were very comfortable with it, but would always start by saying, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is this is what we're not doing. I think it's very important to make that decision from the get-go. We have another question here, interesting here. It's more of a comment. This conversation is making the assumption that all associations are tech savvy and have members who have all the tech tools needed to advocate. It's true. There are associations at different levels, and I think we should address some of that discrepancy here as well, that disparity.
I could chime in if that's okay. One thing to remember is many lawmakers already have this technology. So if you have a membership that has internet access, you can use the technology of that legislative office. Also, hopefully everyone, has a phone, which I believe everyone does. My member of Congress repeatedly hosts a telephone town hall. They actually call me to inform me that this meeting is coming up. Then all I have to do is answer that phone number or whatever day or time that's going to happen. Those, especially in an election year, those elected officials would be more than happy to share their technology if you were able to bring a number of constituents together. They would, especially if it's for the reasons that maybe most of your membership doesn't have that technology or doesn't have the comfort with that technology. Certainly having the technology is only one half of what you need to do. Individuals need to be comfortable with doing so. And so that's another thing to bear in mind, especially after we finish out legislative sessions. Prepare your membership as much as you can for next year, because there's going to be a virtual component for at least the first 6 months. I'm pretty certain about that. So.
And I would risk and say it's going to be the new normal going forward. Just
right.
like, you mentioned anthrax, and you can look at, the medical professions and all the innovations that came and, when they had to overcome big challenges. Somebody here, Matt Polka, said this is also a great time to do Zooms with committee staff, where you can not only share your views, but get a great sense of what's ahead. COVID has allowed for so much greater access and time with staff and their bosses than we would have ever expected. Everybody's home, right?
Well, but Matt also notes that our members recently held a 2-hour fundraiser with a key lawmaker. That's unheard of. And the reason why they could do that, when we were always face-to-face, that lawmaker maybe spent half an hour to 45 minutes with that organization, but driving from to the next event, that would have taken a 2-hour block. So there are efficiencies that have come out of this that can benefit both the lawmakers and our constituents as well, or our members.
And Danielle, if I could just add to that, the comment is we know, at least in my view, that broadband or lack of internet access could very well be a social justice issue. And so I would advocate and argue ensuring in some way that ties to your legislative, congressional ask, whether that's at the state or the local level.
Absolutely, yes.
And even mentioning that, we would love to set our members up to have a conversation, but they don't have the access to this. That's a life experience that lawmaker would be open to, or have their eyes opened up, because they didn't realize that perhaps until they actually see it happening to their own constituents, whether it's in a rural setting, urban setting, just like what we saw when universities were sending their students home. How many of them are going to still be able to distance learn in the settings they were going home to? I wouldn't have been when I was younger. So
it's an equity issue, as you mentioned, Frederick.
And data is important, to David's point, in terms of making the case to a lawmaker about the lack of broadband access within any given ward, municipality, or congressional district.
I think it also is a big plug for being diverse in your tactics. So, not everyone might have internet access. More people will have phone access. So, making it easy, training your people on how to, use their phone to contact a lawmaker that way, how to use their phone to dial into a teletown hall. I mean, we can't rely on any one tactic. And some people are going to be really comfortable on a Facebook Live. Do it, do it for those audiences, but you do have to look at who your base audience is, who your members are. And maybe half of the work is going to be getting everyone comfortable on that platform and not being assumptive that everyone knows how to dial in and do access codes and push the pound sign after. You have to spell it out for people step by step. And I'm a big proponent of doing a dry run, having a pre-call, something like that, just to get everybody comfortable. Because if it is the first time that they have encountered this particular piece of technology, all of the four of us, panelists and Mary Kate, I mean, we're doing this every single day in our work, but the average person does not have the same comfort level. And once you get them over that threshold to do it once, they're like, oh, that was easy. I can do that now. And so really push to the next level with a whole new part of your membership.
And it's hard for us to remember. I mean, Sherry, there was a time when email advocacy didn't exist. And suddenly now it may not always be the most influential tactic that an organization is leveraging at one time on an issue, but it's not going away. We're going to see some of these technologies, the same thing will happen. And to your point about getting individuals comfortable, produce small toolkits, provide them with scripts, provide them with guides on the expectation. You need to download the software ahead of time. Be 5 minutes early, never be 5 minutes late. providing them with just not a 150-page advocate manual that's hard to comb through, but based on each tactic, a small 3 to 5 page toolkit can go a long way with helping them build that comfort so that they can remember what happened on that practice run that they did.
Cool. And we have another one here, Sherry, to your point of diversifying your, methods, congratulatory letters and communications to all the winners. Send in a letter, it's different, with a brochure of your association. So, it's just, might open that door, might open that conversation. So I think the big takeaway here is don't be wedded to one particular method of communication. That will hurt you.
Right. I would also just add to that, that was a stat about 2 years ago, if my memory serves me correctly, that said 70% of members of Congress tweet and they actually look at their tweets. And so sending a letter via email may not be as effective as actually taking a screenshot and tweeting the letter to a member of Congress as well.
Quadricos, that was a great point. We had a campaign for letters to the editor that we did at an organization. And we told the advocates, don't just send it to your local media outlets, share it with your lawmaker's office. One of the letters didn't get published, but the lawmaker was worried about what their stance would be viewed as on the issue because it sounded like perhaps they weren't supportive. So they wrote an op-ed to the newspaper and got the issue published when the letter wasn't going to be published. So it was, again, changing up, trying different tactics. There's nothing like a lawmaker having to clarify where they stand on an issue publicly, which brings attention to your issues and your organization. We do have another question that's been out there for a while that Matt Polka, who I believe is from Pittsburgh, go Steelers. I just want to make sure we address his question where he was asking, they're an advocacy organization. They're on the verge of making a decision to go virtual for their annual fly-in next year. What are your experiences so far regarding attendance? Are you finding success to encourage more people to attend and participate who didn't participate before? And then how do you market a virtual event versus the in-person fly-in? And of course, if we have anyone who wants to chime in our chat box, but any of our other panelists who want to share some of their experiences, what they've had with clients or what your organization has been doing or what you're considering, Quadricos?
I was going to say we are currently in the process of considering what our virtual fly-in would look like. We have had a number of inner conversations with our team, even at the executive level, about what the virtual fly-in will look like. We've also had some conversations with our vendors about what a virtual fly-in would look like. So I would just really advise, as we're currently planning our virtual fly-in, open it up to as many of your membership as possible. Again, it's a great way to educate your membership about what advocacy is and get them talking and interface with members of Congress, state and local elected officials. This is a great time to think, to plan, to strategize, to innovate, and then to execute. Bringing in your marketing communications team or your marketing communications person and having conversations about the various communication channels to really market to your membership, I think is also going to be helpful. And again, this is a great way to bring in younger advocates, right? This is a great way to bring in racial minority advocates within your associations. Currently, what we're seeing is that there are young people who are engaged in the political process. At least pre-COVID, we know that there were a number of young people who were excited about this election. I think that probably still is going to be the case given all that's going on in our society. And so find ways, as I highlighted again in my ASAE article, to really engage young people in this process and open it up to as wide variety of your membership as possible.
And I just want to note to that, Quadricos, you mentioned younger people possibly attending the virtual event. Now, sometimes we may see the fees, which we know the registration fees don't pay for everything at an association's event, whether it's a fly-in or an annual conference, but they do go a long way to some level. It can help those younger professionals who maybe can't afford full freight for an in-person event to attend a virtual event. Roger Rickard is talking about that they had a virtual fly-in on June 3rd and had a 16-fold increase in participation. I would have to think there was more diversity of who was able to participate. Some of them may have had job situations they couldn't attend. Again, we see the financial situation that comes in geographically can come in. And what about those? You know, one of our panelists who recently had major knee surgery and wasn't walking very well for a long time. It would have been a while before I could have attended someone's event. So it can open up a lot of opportunity. Certainly, I don't think you price a virtual event the way you do an in-person event. But I'd love to hear even from some of our attendees how they might market a virtual event versus an in-person fly-in or annual meeting. So
yeah, we have a bunch of comments here too. Judy's saying, remind board members and others that sometimes nodding knowingly when staff is speaking may be more effective than pumping through a statement, showing support for sure. Craig's talking about a cell phone. They use easy texting and purchase several thousands of text messages in bulk. So they send text alerts, and we generate over 65,000 phone calls in a single bill. So that's highly effective. What else? Yeah, a lot of people using social media tactics, including tweetathons and, you know, other methods just to get the word out and get, you know, people energized and to participate. So yeah, somebody said hire digital marketers as senior strategists. That is, you know, you don't have to say that to me. I'm a marketer, and I think marketers are the solution for everything, because the good ones should listen and should do a lot of research, and they should know their stuff. So yes, and that's a big thing that we talk about in our group, right, David, Frederica, and Sherry, the whole advocacy puzzle, pretty much, when you bring in the marketers, the communications people, the advocacy people, the GR people to do this public affairs monster, highly effective department. So yes, I agree. Add different perspectives and you get much, much better results.
You know, one of the other things I want to point out is let's look at how we interact with our loved ones, with our friends, with our colleagues right now during COVID. Does everyone just do email? Is everything, I mean, we were preparing for this, and Danielle, you had a little bit of a challenge. You maybe came in too early and the host wasn't ready, and so now you were just hanging in limbo. So I picked up the phone and I called you. You know, can you extend the enterprise by having volunteer members who are responsible for recruiting additional members, either to attend your virtual fly-in or to be engaged in some type of an advocacy campaign? You know, peer-to-peer. We've heard Quadricos talk about peer-to-peer for PAC. Excuse me, for PAC. There's no reason why you can't have peer-to-peer for advocacy. If each member of your sort of advocacy leadership team is responsible for getting another 10, and then those 10 are responsible for getting another 10, or even just 5, you can see that campaign sort of grow organically.
Right. I mean, we know that within our industry, it is really about, it's a face-to-face interaction, personal conversation, given our industry, whether it's in politics, legislation, advocacy, generally speaking. Given this time of COVID-19, of course, you have to be really innovative, and it's about teamwork. So when it comes to hiring a digital strategist, a senior strategist, when it comes to marketing and communications, you really need a lot of people at the table to really think about effectively and to plan to execute appropriately.
Absolutely. Somebody here is, Natasha is asking us, are we suggesting text to donate on a Twitter platform, for instance? Anybody has a strong view that they want to share, or?
I generally am in favor of multiple ways to reach your membership in terms of campaign contributions. So yes, whether that's tweetathons, whether that's text to donate, whether that's Twitter to donate, multiple, I think, platforms, particularly, again, not that there's a increasingly push towards younger people. I think the more younger people that you are able to bring in, the more creative you're able to be, and the more platforms that you're able to use. And so if your association is able to use multiple platforms to communicate, to advertise, absolutely, I certainly would encourage it.
Yeah, and I'm going to borrow from a good friend who's also saying, if you want to engage with younger stakeholders, try to do a challenge on social media, posting a picture or whatever, reenact your favorite scene of whatever movie, or it just, tie that into your cause. And younger people love challenges. They love, selfies. They love posting. So I think that's a way for them to connect and build community, which we know it's, we're looking for here.
It's not just younger members. It's perhaps, if we're going to look at race, if we're going to look at orientation. One of the prior sessions that we did talked about having members organize various sort of subsets so that, who wants to attend an event where there's no one else like them there, right? So we want to be as inclusive and diverse as possible. The other thing David Falchuk was talking about, he's worried about his ask coming off as tone deaf, given the more substantive issues that are facing the nation right now, whether it's issues on race or the pandemic, economic collapse. Chances are your organization had issues before all of this happened, and they're probably in a more precarious situation given all of these things that have happened. So you definitely want to be cautious as to what you're doing what you're asking in light of the other things, but can you find a way to frame it and have it have some type of relevance to that? That was an advocacy campaign that I recently worked on where actually it was my alma mater. They were going to cut a sports team, and it was only about 2.5 weeks ago that this happened. And as we engaged through Facebook, very quickly used social media to engage the advocacy campaign, overturned that ruling in 12 days. But one of the things we found was that during the Black Lives Matter movement, this university was going to cut the sports team that had the second most number of Black men. And in fact, had more Black men than about 6 or 7 other teams combined. That was something that wasn't overlooked by the administration, and we pointed that out. And we were even able to show that graphically, the kind of things we talk about in an advocacy campaign. Can your ask be shown in one graphic? It was a campaign that lasted 12 days and was featured in the New York Times this past Monday. So, including we did other things. Use video advocacy, social media. Malcolm Gladwell picked up on the campaign. A lot of the things we're talking about were textbook in that advocacy campaign. So.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we're coming up the top of the hour, so I want to give the three of you a chance to leave our participants with some takeaways, right? So, okay, we're past the election. What does it look like for next year? What are the things that should be top of mind as we get ready for the next go round? I'll start with you, Sherry.
Well, some people have already talked on this, but I think, we're going to have a big influx of new and returning elected officials, obviously starting off on a right foot. I think welcoming them, getting those messages out early is important, but also getting the kind of a running start with your folks, with your advocates, and always be building that list. The things that I'm seeing, I think it's kind of evergreen work that you can be doing is continuing to recruit new people. Each time you run a campaign, look at who are the brand new people that activated for the very first time, and kind of doing a whole welcome session around them, getting them indoctrinated into the processes. Because I feel like all of us work in advocacy every single day. It's really new to people in general to pick up the phone or get to their computer and write to an elected official. So we have to take some of these baby steps with people. And if you can do that successfully, I think you bring them on, and you're just going to add numbers to your advocate base.
Sure, Quadricos, can you? And then we have, Natasha wants to know if anybody has any ideas on creative options for virtual networking. While we're at that, Quadricos.
Right, thanks, Danielle. I echo Sherry's comments about welcoming new members of Congress and new lawmakers at the state and local level. Find creative ways to do that. But more importantly, while we're also trying to finish out the rest of this year, I also think that we simultaneously need to start thinking about next year. Start thinking about your legislative priorities. Start thinking about your fly-in. What we do know, of course, is that COVID-19 isn't going away, right? We hope that there's a vaccine by the end of the year, but we're not sure. What we do know, as David mentioned, is that, of course, when there has been a national tragedy happen, whether it was 9/11 or anthrax, it has sort of changed what our normal was. And so we have to actively now start thinking about what our priorities are going to be. We have to start actively thinking about what the fly-in is going to look like for 2021. And so again, I just want to leave everyone with start thinking, start planning, start strategizing, be innovative about what those processes look like next year, and then effectively execute them.
Thank you. What about you, David?
I think one of the most important things to do, especially if you have some time before this year is out, is to do an analysis, survey your membership to see, is there someone who wasn't involved yesterday who's willing to be involved tomorrow? What type of assets do you have? Do you have relationships that can be uncovered? And in building a key contact or an issue ambassador program for one of my clients, we found out that one of our members, her husband actually restored a Corvette for a member of Congress across the state, which helped make that connection to get another advocate to meet with this member of Congress. So look at what you have. Do you have holes? Who will be the new chair and ranking members that you need to focus on in your committees of priority? And what do you have? Do you have anyone in the districts of those lawmakers that you're going to need to start to reach out? They can start reaching out as soon as the election's over, talking about these welcome back to Congress or welcome back to the state capitol or welcome to the state capitol type of thing. So extend the enterprise by leaning on your membership as much as possible and finding those, whether it's younger leaders or other individuals who haven't always been tapped to take the leadership positions, which are usually the much more established members, can help grow that community within your community. It gets them involved with the organization. They go beyond member dues and wanting to attend more events, to use more of your certification programs, and it just takes care of itself and grow in the organization.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think we're a little bit after 3 right now, 3:02, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think it worked out. I hope that we addressed most of your comments and questions. We want to thank everybody for being here today with us. We learned a lot. We hope that you have too. And on behalf of myself and our fellow panelists here, I wish you all a great afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And certainly additional questions for Quadricos or Sherry, their emails are here if you have any other questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.